Do you like getting spooked, or do you like to be the one that causes the scares? Either way, you're covered with Dead by Daylight, a game that has gained quite a following over the last 2 years. Hey guys, I'm Brendan with the Leaderboard, and this is 107 facts about Dead by Daylight. Don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon to become part of the notification squad. Sharpen your machetes and get ready, because there are survivors to hunt down. Dead by Daylight is an asymmetric survival horror online multiplayer video game developed by Behavior Interactive and published by Starbreeze Studios. It's the first original game from longtime developer Behavior Interactive, a studio that for decades specialized in creating other publishers' titles, like Fallout Shelter and EA's Dante's Inferno. They were also known for porting titles like Halo Wars and Shadow of Mordor. Thanks to a partnership with Starbreeze, Behavior has taken the wheel to create exciting new content. Dead by Daylight was released on Steam in June 2016 and released for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One home consoles in June 2017. The game is a 4 versus 1, with one player taking control of the savage killer while the other 4 players are survivors, trying to escape the killer and avoid getting caught, tortured, and killed. The killer and survivors play very differently. The killer plays from a first-person perspective and the survivors play from a third-person perspective, giving the survivors a little more awareness of their surroundings. It seems obvious now, but at first the team wasn't sure about what perspective to lock the players into for killers and survivors. It seemed intuitive to them to have the survivors be more limited in first person and have the killers in third person to feel more powerful. But after some experimentation, they realized that increasing the survivors' view to third person actually gave them more to worry about. The third-person perspective also gave survivors a better ability to hide from the killer and utilize the environment. The first-person perspective was used for killers because, according to the developers, it felt as though the point of view was of someone more focused. The other thing that the first-person perspective does is obvious. It restricts the killer's view enough that hiding for survivors is more exciting and scary. According to game director Mathieu Cote, they wanted the experience to be survivors hoping against hope that the killer wouldn't see them, which first-person actually makes a possibility. An added bonus, when you hide successfully, quote, you feel super clever. The killer, the nurse, has the ability to transport through walls, making it so that even indoors, survivors are never completely safe. The development team was really wary of having an on-screen fear meter or anything to visually represent how scared a player character was. In the words of game director Ash Pennell, Behavior Digital didn't care how scared the character was, they cared how scared the player was. The original prototype of the game was actually 1v1. One killer and one survivor. The survivor had multiple lives to accomplish their objectives, the idea being that the game would be, quote, the ultimate version of hide and seek, where one side is much more powerful. Eventually, Behavior Digital realized that the uncertainty of relying on your teammates was what kept the game fresh. They added in the team mechanic for survivors, which they believe is where the real emotional core of the gamer's experiences come from. The reason Survive with Friends was not included in the game at launch was that part of Behavior Digital's intention was to increase the player's wariness of the people on their team. With no way to communicate through voice chat, there was no way to understand their intentions and/or what they were feeling about you. In the office, it was referred to as antisocial multiplayer. The two main things survivors need to find are the exits and the generators to power them. Once enough generators are repaired, you can escape through one of the doors. There are interactive elements in the levels to help the survivors not be caught, like closets you can hide in and tall grass to sneak around in. It's important to use the geography of the level to your advantage. There are items in the game like health packs and toolboxes. If you escape a level with them, you get to use them again in the next round. Some items come with stat boosting effects, like making you repair generators faster, or a flashlight that allows you to temporarily blind the killer and help one of your friends. There are currently 12 playable survivors, including DLC to pick from in total so far. There are more on the horizon, with new characters being delivered through the rest of 2018. Each survivor's special ability can be taught to other survivors, but only after you reach certain experience levels in the Blood Web. Optionally, perks can be purchased through the in-game currency in the Shrine of Secrets. Some perks help the entire team, like Ace's ability Ace in the Hole, which increases the odds of getting rarer in-game loot from chests. When Dead by Daylight first came out, it only had 4 survivors to choose from: Dwight Fairfield, Jake Park, Meg Thomas, and Claudette Morel. Dwight Fairfield is considered the default character of the game, with his role being classified as Nervous Leader. His perks and abilities have to do with boosting the stats of those in proximity to him. Jake Park's role is solitary survivalist, which means he is able to move around the map in a more effective manner, as well as being able to survive injuries better. Meg Thomas is the energetic athlete, which gives her the ability to outrun killers and create some distance between them. Claudette Morel, the studious botanist, is able to heal her teammates and herself more effectively through her knowledge of plants. The other 8 survivors consist of a couple of original characters as well as licensed characters from movies and even other video games, including Bill from Left 4 Dead. The developers considered having the survivor's goal be getting keys to start a car and escape. This model was later replaced by the generators as the fiction and gameplay shifted. Part of the reason that the game has been able to keep consistent updates is that Behavior Digital avoided overworking people and burning them out, something all too frequent in the game industry. According to game director Mathieu Cote, part of their work ethic was that overtime is a dirty word. Jumping through windows at high speed will alert the killer to your presence. When you're injured, you will leave a trail of blood behind you, and killers and survivors can see it. But like scratch marks, the trail will eventually fade away after a few seconds. A murder of crows can be a very big problem in this game. If you get too close or startle them, they'll start to caw loudly and fly off, which can be the equivalent of shooting a flare in the sky for the killer to follow. Skill checks are an important mechanic to master as well. When trying to perform certain tasks like repairing a generator or healing someone, you'll need to perform a quick time event minigame. If you fail a skill check, a loud noise will be made and the killer will be alerted to your location. So be sure not to stick around too long if you fail a skill check. It's possible to detect the killer using a mechanic known as the terror radius. It's essentially your heartbeat. The closer the killer gets, the harder your heart beats. High tier players can pinpoint killers pretty accurately using it. The stain is an indicator light that's emitted in front of the killer. It's useful for figuring out which direction the killer is facing in, and if you've been seen or not, as your character will be covered in the red light if you're in the killer's sights. Helping out your fellow survivors can work in your favor in the long run. Aside from healing them, you can also save them from the hook, a literal meat hook that the killer has to hang survivors from to sacrifice them. Players can also save survivors from capture by stunning the killer while they're carrying someone, causing them to drop the other player. Hey, you might have been annoyed by how the game ungroups your Survive with Friends team after every match. Why do they do that? Turns out it's because the mode wasn't originally intended to be there. It was hastily prepared after launch, and the ungrouping of friends was a sacrifice that Behavior Digital had to make to get the mode available to players faster. Also, since Dead by Daylight doesn't have dedicated servers, once the connection with the killer host is lost, so is your group. Chests are important to look out for, as they contain helpful items like med kits, maps, and toolboxes. But be careful, as they're yet another noisy object that can alert the killer. It might be worth it though. Chests also grant blood points for searching through them. Sabotaging hooks is a big mechanic in the game as well. Survivors can sabotage hooks to disable them for the match and permanently disable things like traps laid down by the killer. Killers, on the other hand, can also damage partially repaired generators, making the struggle for the survivors even more stressful. Killers are on average faster than the survivors and will usually gain speed as their bloodlust rises over the match. So make sure you aren't seen if you want to survive. If you are spotted, you'll have to use the environment to your advantage and try and break the line of sight. Wooden pallets are an item that survivors can use if they're being pursued. At the start of the round, all pallets are upright, but if you're being chased or if you just want to make an obstacle for the killer behind you, you can pull one down to the ground. Survivors can vault over pallets, but killers have to take their time and break it to pass. The hatch is a mysterious exit door that appears during the round and is usually locked. If a survivor can find a key though, they can open the hatch and escape. The hatch will also appear and open automatically if there's just one survivor left with at least 2 generators repaired. Certain abilities the killer can learn create auras that will create an outline around important objects that the killer needs to be aware of. Things like the generator and the hooks are always able to be seen with an unlimited distance thanks to their aura. Trials tend to have 7 generators total, so killers can't just camp out one, since not every generator needs to be repaired for the survivors to escape. If you're playing as the killer, you'll want to make a patrol route and make sure you're not staying in one place for too long. The first killer developed for the game was the Trapper. In early prototypes for the game, killers came with randomized abilities that would change each time the game started. Some of those abilities spun off into different killers, like the Wraith becoming invisible, and some never will. One of them that you will never see, killers used to be able to fly. All killers have 2 basic abilities with their weapon, a quick attack and a lunge attack. A quick attack is done by quickly tapping the action button, and the lunge attack is done by holding the action button taken down. The quick attack is fast, but not very far ranged, and the lunge takes some wind-up. After a killer performs an attack, however, there is a cooldown time where their movement speed is slower, and even longer cooldown if the attack made a hit. An element of uncertainty was central to the experience that Behavior Digital wanted to create. When each match starts, they wanted players to be unsure of how to act because they didn't know what killer they were facing off against. Once a killer has incapacitated one of the survivors, his next task is to carry them to a hook and sacrifice them to the Entity. The Entity, according to Benedict Baker's journal, is evil in its purest form. If a survivor is not rescued from one of the hooks in time, they will be sacrificed and lose the trial. Benedict Baker is not a player character and is only known through his journal entries, which can be seen in the manual as well as in-game and things like loading screens. There is speculation that Benedict Baker might become a killer in one of the later DLC chapters, since some of his entries deal with him starting to lose hope, which is something the Entity feeds on. In the 1950s, Benedict Baker was searching around a town called Weeks, a town with a far above average number of missing persons cases. Even though there were over 300 reported cases, none of them were ever solved. During his investigation, he had found himself waking up in a strange place, with no idea of how he got there. His last memories are him walking up to the McMillan estate, the former hub of Weeks. Once trapped in the mysterious woodlands, he's been keeping track of every encounter he has in hopes of spreading his knowledge to others. Baker's encounters have ranged from the survivors and killers to even catching a glimpse of the Entity itself, the otherworldly being that's causing all this trouble. The Entity is an otherworldly being that exists between worlds, whose purpose is to try and manifest itself into our world by trapping people in its dimension. The only way it can make a connection to our world is at scenes of great violence, so extreme that it ends in fatalities. Once something that meets the criteria has been filled, a rift opens that can pull people into the Entity's domain. The Entity's domain is known as the Realms of the Entity, and it never takes the same shape twice, because it's the Entity trying to make a copy of our reality based on where the rift is, and it can never get it quite right. The first victims pulled into the Entity's realms are usually people who summoned the Entity in the first place, the killers. Next, prey for the killers are pulled into the realms, the survivors. They always find themselves at a campfire, not knowing how they woke up there. The Entity needs the survivors to feel hope, which the Entity feeds off of. Once a survivor is sacrificed enough times, they'll begin to lose hope and eventually become killers themselves. Naya Carlson is the first new survivor to be introduced through DLC. Before falling into the Entity's domain, she was a street artist who went by the name Mashsticks. Naya's perks, balanced landing, urban evasion, and streetwise, make her a good choice for quickly completing objectives and evading the killers. Naya was dared to tag an old asylum when she mysteriously disappeared into the Entity's realms, never to be seen again. William Bill Overbeck from Valve's Left 4 Dead was next introduced in a PC-exclusive DLC, which makes sense considering the PC version is on Steam, Valve's game service. Bill is an old soldier who was the survivor of a zombie outbreak. In his last moments before being surrounded and overwhelmed by zombies, he found himself by the familiar campfire. Bill's unique perks, Left Behind, Borrowed Time, and Unbreakable, are pretty good for those moments when things start to look grim. Since Bill is a tough dude, he knows how to survive in pretty much any situation. David King was introduced in DLC titled A Lullaby for the Dark. He is the single child of a wealthy family who started out as a rugby player. After assaulting a referee, turned to underground boxing for fun. David is classified as a rugged scrapper, with his perks We're Gonna Live Forever, Dead Hard, and No Mither, which rewards players who take on a more confrontational style of play. But be careful, as his attacks can leave him vulnerable. Laurie Strode was introduced in the Halloween DLC, based on the movie of the same name. She's labeled as a determined survivor, who is prepared for anything coming her way. Laurie's unique perks Soul Survivor, Object of Obsession, and Decisive Strike give her a lot of power in the survival department, but this unfortunately leaves her exposed at the same time. In the original Halloween, Laurie was played by actor Jamie Lee Curtis, but in this DLC she's voiced by Catherine LaCour. Also, her hair and facial features don't look exactly like Jamie Lee Curtis, probably because they couldn't nail down the likeness rights. Laurie also introduces a new realm called Lampkin Lane. based on the neighborhood in Haddonfield that the original Halloween took place in. Ace Visconti is a survivor that was first revealed in the DLC of Flesh and Mud. His role is Lucky Gambler, which plays into his perks. He's also the only survivor so far to have a smiling model, showing just how lucky Ace feels. Ace's unique perks Open-Handed, Up the Ante, and Ace in the Hole increase the luck of all other survivors when opening chests in the realms. Before finding himself in the realms of the entity, Ace was a high roller gambler who started to pile up debt, and that debt was with the wrong crowd. When those people came to collect, he was nowhere to be found. Feng Min is a survivor that was introduced in the DLC Spark of Madness. Her role is Focused Competitor, seeing as how she was a pro gamer before she found herself trapped in the realms. Feng's unique perks Technician, Lithe, and Alert all increase her ability to stealthily repair generators and locate the killer. Before falling into the entity's realms, Feng Min was an esports player. Her online handle was Shining Lion, and she was on a high-tier team called the Laser Bears. Quentin Smith was introduced in the Nightmare on Elm Street DLC, based on the 2010 remake and not the 80s original starring Robert Englund. Quentin is classified as Resolute Dreamwalker, a person who's able to increase the survivability of his team. His unique perks, Pharmacy, Vigil, and Wake Up, help others locate the exit gates as well as recover more easily. The current final survivor is David Tapp. He first appeared in the Saw DLC. He is a licensed character from the movie of the same name. His role is Obsessed Detective. David's unique perks Tenacity, Detective's Hunch, and Stakeout make his build more of an objective-focused survivor who's able to recover quickly. Evan McMillan, aka the Trapper, is the first known killer in the game. He gets his name from setting bear traps all over the map. The perks the Trapper comes with, Unnerving Presence, Brutal Strength, and Agitation, give him the ability to chase down survivors as well as carry them to the hook in an efficient manner. The Trapper has a whole backstory dealing with him being the heir to the McMillan estate, running the family mines and slowly losing his grip. He eventually trapped hundreds of his own workers in the mines with an explosion. Then he killed his dad. Philip Ojomo, or the Wraith, is a stealth-based killer. He has the ability to cloak and uncloak at the ring of his bell. The Wraith's perks Predator, Bloodhound, and Shadowborn grant him the power to track down survivors in the most efficient manner. Philip's backstory has to do with him first coming to America and getting a job at a scrapyard. At first he loved his job, but one night he found that the cars he'd been crushing had people in them, and he had been helping bad people take care of some dirty business. After finding this out, he horribly mangled the guy responsible and then disappeared into the entity's realm. Max Thompson Jr., or the Hillbilly, is a fast-moving killer, able to cover the map in a short amount of time, as well as being able to instantly down the survivors with his trusty chainsaw. The Hillbilly's unique perks, Enduring, Lightborn, and Tinkerer, make him a difficult enemy to lose in a chase. He's all about the long game, chasing and resisting attacks of survivors. The Hillbilly was born hideously disfigured so that his parents, being horrible people, locked him away for years and years. Eventually, he got free and exacted his revenge by killing his parents. It wasn't much after that he found himself hunting survivors in the realms. Sally Smithson, aka the Nurse, is a killer with the ability to warp around the map. When the Nurse is hunting you down, it's gonna be a lot harder to hide. The Nurse's unique perks Strider, Thanatophobia, and A Nurse's Calling give her the ability to actually lower the survivor's ability stats and track them better when they're in an injured state. The Nurse's backstory has her becoming a widow and having to find a way to pay the bills. She gets a job at the local asylum. After years of seeing the abuse and unspeakable atrocities committed there, she eventually snaps and kills everyone, including the patients. Anna, or the Huntress, is a range-based killer. Her ability to throw hatchets at survivors allows her to hurt you from a distance. The Huntress's perks Beasts of Prey, Territorial Imperative, and Hex Huntress Lullaby lets her have better map awareness and chasing abilities, which allows her to really put the pressure on survivors. The Huntress was taught from an early age how to survive in the wilderness. Unfortunately, her mother died on a particularly dangerous elk hunt. After that, Anna began to hunt animals for survival and eventually began kidnapping girls from the villages, wanting a child of her own. Things all went downhill from there. Michael Myers, or the Shape from the Halloween movies, is a haunting-based serial killer, spending his time watching you from a distance rather than constantly in your face chasing. The Shape's perks Save the Best for Last, Play with Your Food, and Dying Light focus around the concept of picking one survivor to be the killer's obsession, which triggers effects on the affected survivor. Game director Mathieu Cote considers releasing the Halloween DLC on the first Halloween after the game's release his favorite moment from development. "It was unreal," he says. "All of a sudden I felt like an adult. it added legitimacy to the game. Lisa Sherwood, or the Hag, is a curse-based killer, with her abilities allowing her to place phantasm traps and then teleport them when they are stepped on by a survivor. The Hag's perks, Hex the Third Seal, Hex Ruin, and Hex Devour Hope, all deliver severe penalties to survivors for as long as the Hex totems remain. Bubba Jr. Sawyer, or Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, is, probably obviously, a chainsaw-wielding killer. He's able to go into a deadly frenzy, which allows him to immediately down a survivor. Leatherface's unique perks Knockout, Barbecue and Chili, and Franklin's Demise allow him not only to find survivors more easily, but also take away their tools and abilities. Dead by Daylight is far and away the most successful IP that Behavior Digital has ever made, but it is not their first one. The team is responsible for games such as Naughty Bear for the Xbox 360 and Wet for the same console. Once they realized that Dead by Daylight was a success and that the game would have legs for a while, Behavior Digital set 3 rules for themselves. 1, don't break up the community. New maps would always be free to everybody so that everyone could still play together. 2, avoid pay to win. Buying a new killer would be a different experience for players, not an easier one. The first cosmetic DLC for the game was the 80s suitcase, which only included flashy neon outfits, something that game director Mathieu Cote quips makes it pay to lose. The third rule was that Behavior Digital wanted to be as generous as they could. If they could afford to release DLC for free, they would, and have many times. Dead by Daylight sales topped 1 million units 2 months after its release, and had reached 1.8 million units on PC by the end of 2016. We're looking forward to new killers and more DLC in the future. Based on those numbers, we're looking forward to many new killers and more DLC in the future. And that's about it. Thanks for watching 107 Facts about Dead by Daylight. Which killer do you want to see in the game next? Have you unlocked the secrets of the hatch? Let us know in the comments below. If you like this video, consider supporting us by subscribing or hitting the bell icon to stay in the loop each time we upload to the Leaderboard, your home for video game facts.